Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our session. I think we titled it originally, How to Avoid Project Failure. So if that's what you want to do, you're in the right session. If you want to achieve project failure, there's some other sessions going on right now. I'm just kidding. So thank you very much for attending. Business process modeling is what this is all about. My name is John Gray. I am the Chief Technology Officer and one of the founders of Infiniti Consulting. So as CTO, I'm kind of the head geek, right? I'm a technologist. I got into this business because I love technology, building software, building systems. But after a few years of building software that I thought was very good, but users didn't like so much, or it wasn't well accepted, I realized that it was probably a good thing to understand the problem that you're trying to solve before you go ahead and write software. So that's when I started to really gain an appreciation for how important it was to really understand the business. So I want to introduce to you our team that's going to talk about business process modeling this afternoon. We're very lucky to have with us a couple of folks from the state. So we've got Chris Coyote, who, what's your role now, Chris? You're the big cheese over at BOE?
Chief Technology Officer.
Okay. So,
I'm here, you're my model.
And then Deborah Dixon.
Hello.
And what's your role?
The chief, the IT branch of Office of HIPAA Compliance.
Okay, thank you. Gary Hamilton, who is our business process modeling guru. And then Ken White, who's got a ton of experience with both business process modeling and project management. So really what we're trying to do here today is give you practical information that you can take back and use on the project. So often you kind of get things dumped on you to go get all the requirements for this project. Well, how do I do that? So hopefully what we'll share here today will really help you understand that type of thing. So one little story before I hand it off. We got in trouble yesterday. We were trying to bring in a gift for you all, for everybody. We were going to give out beer, if you can believe that, right? Because Scott Sanders and I, a couple of years ago, went over to Rubicon Brewery to try to sell IT services to them. And we failed at that, and somehow we came away owning part of Rubicon Brewery, right? So, but we brought our beer, our little gifts down yesterday, and got them confiscated. Apparently, you're not allowed to give beer out of this venue. So, however, if you stop by and you give your business card to Jeremy Dawson back there, he will connect you up with our gift outside of this premises. Plus, we're doing a drawing for some Amazon gift cards, Jeremy? Yeah, 2 gift cards. 2 gift cards. So once again, if you drop your card to him, we'll get you hooked up. Okay, so with that, I will pass it off to Ken White.
Thanks, Sean. Only at Infiniti Consulting can you do an IT project and drink beer while you're doing it. Gotta love that, gotta love that. So my name is Ken White, and I want to talk to you today with my colleagues about business process modeling. So what we'd like to cover today, first of all, is what is a business process model, and why in the world would you want to do one? After that, we want to tell you about how to do one. Specifically, how do you start the effort, how you manage the effort, and what are some of the benefits that you'll get out of it. So that's what we want to cover today. And with that, I'll start out by explaining exactly what a business process model is. It's really a very straightforward concept, but the amazing thing about business process modeling is that not everybody does it on their projects, and it's an important step that's often missed when you initiate a project. A business process model itself, along with another item that we're going to talk about today called a functional hierarchy diagram, are 2 things that tell you, first of all, what your business does, what a State Department does, what an organization does, what a business does. What are our functions? What do we do? And then after you do your functional hierarchy diagram, the next step is identifying how you do it. And that's where the business process modeling comes in. So the functional hierarchy diagram that Gary's going to talk about tells you what your organization does from a business perspective. The modeling tells you how you do it. And it's really important to take this step because one of the things that it does is the way that we construct them and use them on our projects is that it's a picture. It's not a bunch of words, it's not a bunch of text, which is great because it makes the model very easy for you to read, review, and get some context from. So you can easily understand it without having to spend 2 or 3 days going through a volume of documentation this thick. So it's easily referenced, it's a picture rather than text. And the key thing about both of those diagrams is that they serve as the foundation for doing a lot of things that you're going to do, not only in a traditional waterfall system development life cycle, but also if you're taking an agile approach to your projects as well. And we'll talk about how that works throughout this presentation. So you guys have all seen this before. This is your typical waterfall system development life cycle. And you see the stages across the top: planning, analysis, design, construction, and implementation. And at the bottom, there are a number of activities or artifacts that you would produce if you're going through that process. So you have your plans, you have your charter, you have your requirements, your specs, your use cases, all the types of things that many of you have experience doing when you do a project. But here's the key, and here's where business process modeling comes into play. When we've done projects like this to, I think, great success, we have taken what we call a robust delivery approach to those projects. And in so doing, we've done 2 things. First, we've developed what is called a functional hierarchy diagram, which explains what the organization looks like and what it does from a functional perspective. And then secondly, we've actually taken those, driven down, and done process models so we understand how the organization works. And that's key because those 2 documents support a lot of the activities that you would do, not only in an agile approach, but also in a traditional life cycle approach as well. So the functional hierarchy diagram, you can use that to develop your project charter. You can do that as the basis of doing your schedule. You can do that as a way of explaining what's in and what's out of scope on your project. Then, when you take the next step and do your process modeling, you could use those documents to provide the basis for getting your user requirements done, your use cases, your use stories, even your organizational change management approach as well. Because as Gary's going to show you, you can look at that document and clearly see what's in and out of scope on your project and equate that to the people that are going to be impacted by the project, whether it's an IT project or whether it's business process redesign, and then determine where you should target your organizational change management activities. So it supports those, again, not only from an agile standpoint, because even if you're doing an agile project, you're still going to be doing a lot of these activities. But also from a traditional SDLC approach as well. And I might also add that doing these 2 documents fits very well in an agile approach, primarily because, number one, they are easy for you to look at and say, this is the organization, this is how it works, and this is what we do. But they're also very straightforward and lean in terms of how much documentation they are. You know, Agile talks about doing documentation, but being very lean about how to do it. And when we show you these models, you'll see that they're very lean, which means, again, you can easily understand them, but you can also easily update them as well and keep everybody on the same page in terms of what's in and out of scope and what the organization is doing and how your project, whether it's an IT project or whether it's a business process redesign project, how it affects the various parts of your organization. So the cool thing about doing those 2 documents is that it provides you all with a common understanding of the organization and the project domain. It provides everybody with a common understanding. It keeps everybody on the same page. Everyone understands what's in and what's out of a project. When things change, you can very quickly and easily change those documents, show them back to your stakeholders so that everybody's on the same page as well. It can be the foundation for organizational transition. And one other added bonus that I would add is that the new SIM 19 approach with the different stage gates that you have to go through to get an IT project approved in the state of California, it requires you to do some business process modeling. So this approach aligns very well with that new process as well. So before we begin and before we start to explain how to do it, the first thing you're going to need to do is figure out who needs to be involved in this process. And it's very straightforward. The first group of individuals is your business analyst. The business analyst is a person that drives the process. They are the ones that facilitate the different workshops that you're going to go through. And they're also the ones that are going to scribe everything and actually develop the FHD as well as the business process model. Next, you have your subject matter experts. They're the ones that know how the organization functions day in and day out. They're the ones that do the work. They're the ones that know what the processes are. And the business analyst is the person that needs to draw that knowledge out and embed that into our functional hierarchy diagram and our process models. And then finally, a key person or key individual in this entire process are executives. Once you pull all that together and before you start embarking and scoping your projects, you need to show that to your executives so they can look at it and go, yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. This is what our organization does. This is what our department does. This is what our business does. And even though they may not understand at a detailed level functionally how all the functional flows are going to occur, they can at least look at those and have an understanding of how the details work as well. So those are the three roles that are involved in doing your functional hierarchy diagram and your business process model. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Gary to explain how it's all done. Gary?
All right. Thanks, Ken. Hi, everybody. Okay, so Ken went over the systems development lifecycle stages, right? I think we're all familiar with them, and also the typical delivery that goes with that. And we showed you a more robust approach to doing that, where we introduced a functional hierarchy diagram leading into the business process models. So it's kind of in serial. So you want to do your functional hierarchy diagram first, and then do the business process models. One, because you want to have your functional hierarchy defined, because that's going to lead into how you scope what's going to be business process modeled. So functional hierarchy diagram. So enables you to model the organization functions in your organization in a hierarchical structure. I think a lot of us may have seen one of those before. So it consists of functions, sub-functions, and business processes. So top level functions, what are they, right? So you've got under your organization, you've got your mission, you've got your divisional strategic functions that you want to accomplish. So in, say, a retirement services company, that might be delivery of services, or it may be customer service. If it was in, say, a hospital, that could be maybe clinical, it could be hospital operations, it could be rehabilitation. Okay, so those would be what would be your high-level functions. Sub-functions, we then break down those divisional level functions into smaller little parcels. So if we take our, say, hospital again with our clinical function, underneath that you may have clinical services, patient management, pharmacy. These will be your sub-functions. And then underneath that, we then break down each one of those sub-functions into the business processes that make it up, right? So it's maybe, you could think of it as your sub-function is an aggregate of those business processes that go underneath it. So it's also an easy way for you to quickly document your organization in 1 or 2 pages. Some organizations you can probably fit on 1 or 2 pages. Larger, I think we've got into 5 or 6. Okay? But you've got an easy reference point for you to look at that's going to show you what the organization is. And it also provides you a good overview at a high and a medium level of what that organization is doing functionally. So one of the things that Ken mentioned was about the statewide information management manual, the SIM process. And this actually fits into that stage gate process. So when you're actually doing the requirements, the mid-level requirements, that you're going to be going out for an RFI or a procurement effort, you're going to be tying them to these functions that you've defined at this level. So you're actually supplementing what you're going to be doing in that stage gate process. So let's take a look at a functional hierarchy diagram. So this is one, say, for a retirement services company. We're going to call it Gotham City for now. Okay? They're doing some pension services. So you could think of the high-level functions as delivery, customer service, delivery support, and organization services. Underneath it, you've then got broken down your sub-functions. So let's take customer service, since that's the biggest one and the one we're probably the most familiar with. We've identified that we do management of customers and employers, managing contributions, managing accounts, managing benefits, and providing education. So one of the things you'll notice on here is we got some pretty colors, right? But they actually mean something. So as you're going through the process of doing a functional hierarchy diagram, we want to identify what is in scope of your project domain. So even though we're doing a functional hierarchy diagram for your organization, we actually want to identify what is in scope of the project that you are doing this for. So the ones in green we're highlighting because they're in scope of the project, okay? We also have these orange ones. So we advocate taking a wide cut approach. So kind of like no man soldier left behind kind of thing, right? It's kind of like that with our business processes and our sub-functions. We don't want to miss something, because if we come back later on, we know that it's going to cost twice as much, take 2 times as long, implement the schedule, right? So we want to include those at this point. But we also know that some things are out of scope, so they aren't colored. So delivery support, if you look at legislative support and public affairs, well, that's not really in scope of a project with the retirement services, okay? So this would be the top level of your functional hierarchy diagram. It should fit onto one page, okay? It should be that one-page snapshot that says what your organization is. And then we follow on taking each sub-function and breaking it down to all of its business processes. So on the next page, we can see we start off with the functional level, delivery, and then we have our sub-functions. In this case, we've got knowledge management, and we've got managed plan investments. Well, on the left, we know that knowledge management, we have managed actuarial services. That's part of what's in scope of this project. Managing data and statistics, kind of, right? So we want to leave that. We want to do a modeling effort on that. So then moving on, we have managed knowledge, and we have provide counseling services. Out of scope. So as we're going through this process, we're building up a list of all the business processes we want to model. So when this functional hierarchy diagram is complete, we'll have that list. We can then, from a project management standpoint, estimate what it's going to take to do that effort going forward. So one of the things we advocate is doing the functional hierarchy diagram right at the beginning of the project. That way, everybody's getting the benefit of this. Okay, everybody's got context when they come into the project, because people are going to be coming in, designers, testers, org change management people. So in the past, we have Chris Cayetti with us, who worked on something very similar to this, who's going to give us some pros. I actually work with him. So, so he's going to go into some of the pros of this.
Thanks, Gary. So as Gary and Ken have talked about, this is a very valuable tool, especially for large transformational efforts, which a lot of the people in the state are going through now. So in this situation, the teachers' retirement system was going into a system replacement of their core business system, which touched about every part of the organization. So it was easy to say we have a legacy system that we have to replace that touches everybody. It's going to fix everything. So that actually used to be the name is. It's going to fix every one of our problems, but really that's unrealistic in trying to define the scope of what this was going to do. So once we made the decision to go ahead and replace that system, this was very helpful in kind of determining what's going to be in and what's going to be out. What is this system going to do? What's it going to fix? What's it going to enhance? And we didn't really have a good picture of what the organization did from a business perspective. And what information we did have was, as Ken said, volumes of paper. So that's not very helpful for decision makers, especially your executive decision makers who are trying to give you guidance on what's going to be in and out of scope of your project. They're not going to read through volumes of paper. They're not going to have their staff read through that and kind of do a summary analysis. That takes a lot of time. We didn't really have a lot of time. We were kind of on a fast track to try to get this thing moving because we were already 5 years behind. So this was a perfect approach for us to define that. So we did it in a relatively short amount of time, probably about a year, to actually define that what the roles of the organization was and vet that through our executives to determine what was going to be in and out of scope of this project. That not only helped us determine what the schedule was, it also, we leveraged that with the market research we did with new solutions that were out there. So we determined what was going to be in scope that was really feasible. We also didn't want to go ask for things in a procurement that wasn't really feasible out in the marketplace. So we were able to map those two data points and actually better define what was a feasible ask in our procurements. Also helped us determine what levels of resources we were going to need and what kind of skill sets we were going to need. And as Ken mentioned before, if you see some of the areas, you're going to identify what areas are going to have the largest impact from an organizational change management perspective, because these transformational projects are going to change the way a lot of businesses, and for us in government in the future, it's going to significantly change the way that we do business in government. And some areas will be impacted more than others. Right now with Agile coming up, technology is really significantly impacted. They're not used to an Agile approach, so from a change management perspective, it's big. And as you've heard from a lot of people talking today, it's not the technology or the process, it's the change management aspect that's going to make that successful. So this will actually help identify not only in the business, and I consider technology another business function when you're looking at these diagrams, it's going to really help you target what your organizational change management efforts are going to be so your folks are ready to actually go through that change.
Hey, quick question before you move on, Gary.
Okay.
Have you found that functional breakdown is different to the way departments are organized, or are they sometimes organized exactly?
Well, that's funny you said that, because past experience has been that I've usually started with one of those.
The org chart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It ties in very nicely. I mean, you don't model the actual functional hierarchy diagram in the same way. Things will change, but you can use that as part of your input to that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. More? No? Okay. All right.
Keep going.
Okay. All right, so business process modeling, right? So we've now got our scope. We've got the list of business processes that we need to model. Okay, we've got a functional hierarchy diagram in place. We've got context for all the project members. And meanwhile, as Ken showed us in the SDLC in the robust approach, functional hierarchy is done, the project is kicking off. So business process modeling is gearing up, should be gearing up, about the same time your business requirements work is gearing up. That way, you're getting maximum benefit, because as you're understanding the business, there are people who are doing the requirements are actually getting to know how the business is working at the same time. So this is also feeding the requirements. Then it's also used later on. It should wrap up before your org change management and your training plans are being done. Then it's serving, so you're getting to, you can see your processes, what's changing, and how you need to deal with those impacts. So business process modeling is the activity of representing processes of an enterprise so that the current process can be analyzed and improved. So if we were sat here about 20 years ago, you'd probably be starting off from paper world, right? And you'd be improving it. Today, we're probably taking a project that's a new tech project that's replacing an old tech project. So typically, you're going to be going in, you're going to be modeling it, because you're going to know that you're going to implement a new system and do improvements if you can do that along the way too. Performed by a team of business analysts and subject matter experts who know the process, who have specialty knowledge in that process. So how do we do it? So we recommend using business process model and notation, okay, BPMN. So BPMN was developed by the Business Process Management Initiative back in 2004. And then they merged with the Object Management Group. But it is a graphical representation of a business process model, and it's an ISO notation. So meaning that everybody's going to be on the same page. So you yourself as project team members who understand the business process modeling, and also the team members, subject matter experts, even the end users, will be able to identify what is going on in one of these processes. You'll see over to the right, there's a list of those BPMN standard shapes. That's the out-of-the-box BPMN shapes that you get with Visio 2016. There's other more add-ons that you can get. But we advocate that you stick pretty stringent to the symbols that we have listed on here to avoid any ambiguity and people asking, what does that mean? Oh, yeah, well, so-and-so did that. I'm like, well, I don't understand it. You avoid all of that. So it's really what it's doing is it's creating a standardized bridge between all the process stakeholders. So the components. So a lot of this you may be familiar with. Organizational units. These are your swim lanes. So on a diagram, which I'm going to show you in a minute, these swim lanes, it kind of looks like a swimming pool, except process activities going on. They are typically a department, a team, or a role that owns part of the tasks in that process. You have triggers and exits. Everything has a starting point, and everything has an ending point, and so does a business process. Tasks. These are the action level steps or group of steps that are going on in your business process. You have gateways, and these are conditional branches in the flow. It may be because there's a threshold being hit on the number of widgets a customer can buy, so you have to send them through a different process. And then we have data stores and we have data objects. So data stores, these are persistent data stores, okay? These are used throughout your organization. They'll appear on more than one business process, probably maybe like 15 or 20 of them. And they would be, in today's world, probably like an enterprise database. And then we have data objects. And these look small, but these are key to your organizational change. So these are data required or produced in that flow step. So it could be a form, it could be a report, it could be an invoice, an extract, or it could even be a piece of paper. Somebody scribbles some notes down every night for some other person the next day. But these are especially important because when the business process analysis is finished, because this feeds into your organization change, you've now identified all these data objects, all these pieces of paper, all those communication techniques. You've identified those so that in the new world, when you're doing the organizational change, you already know what that's going to be. So let's take a look at a model. Yes, it's a simple model, but it has to be. So processing a customer order, let's take that. So we have a customer and we have a shop. In this case, we call it My Shop. So we have, in the swim lanes, the organizational units, we have a customer. And for My Shop, we got two departments there. We got the sales department and we got the delivery department. And it starts with a customer needing a service. He wants to buy some widgets or he needs something delivering. So he places an order, probably online, and it goes into the database. That is your data store. That message flows to the sales department at My Shop, and they receive and process that order out of the database, and they also then take a look at that inventory report. Now that's a key piece right there because it's a data object, and we need to know that because later on, that inventory report may be replaced by something else. It then goes to the delivery department, and they deliver the order. They they pull the widget off the shelf, they've looked at the inventory report, and they go, right, they package it up, ready to be sent out to the user. There's then what we call the conditional statement, where is there a delivery success? It could be that the widget's defective, it doesn't work. They go, we need to give the customer a refund. There's no more in stock. We need to order some more. So it goes back to the sales department where they provide a refund. You'll see some blue notes on there, so you can add additional information onto your business process. In fact, we advocate as much as you want on here. And then there is a message flow back to the customer where he's receiving his refund, and then in this case, the process is ending. But if we go back down to step 10 in the delivery department flow lane, we then get delivery success. So the widget's there, it's been boxed up, it's ready to go. They then complete the order. Okay, it's ready to be shipped out of the office. They then issue a receipt. They either print it, or they fill something out, type it in, they print out an order receipt, and then it's shipped back to the customer. And the customer receives that order, they get that order receipt, and then the order process is complete. So that is one succinct business process flow. Now, I know it's kind of simplistic, but in the essence of time, that's really but that is to be built on. So Deborah Dixon's with us from DACS, and who went through an initiative just like this. So I'm going to hand it over to her to talk about some pros of this approach.
Great, thank you very much. So as you've heard today, we're talking about business process modeling. So we did that at the Department of Healthcare Services. One of the things that we do is to obtain enhanced federal funding. How many have ever heard of an advanced planning document? Do you know what that is? Oh, more than I would have thought. Okay, great. For those that don't know, that's the vehicle that we use to obtain federal funding above and beyond the 50-50 split that a Medicaid normally gets, 75% and even up to 90%. So it's really worth the effort to make sure that those projects that qualify for enhanced funding, you submit that document and get the federal funding before you start that project. So we decided to use this project to document this advanced planning process, how you get that document submitted, created, submitted, approved, and track all of those requests that we have to our federal partners. And we use this business process modeling. So for those on the business side and the operations side, this can be a little daunting when you look at that, so you hear all these terms, diagrams and swim lanes and repositories and all these other kinds of semi-technical terms. That can be a little bit intimidating for some of our folks that are on the operations or program side of life. They don't work necessarily with projects directly or on the technical side. So some of these terms were a little scary to folks. So we got all of our folks together that we know are familiar with how to obtain these and write these documents to get that funding, and then those that weren't familiar, because sometimes it helps when you get those people together that don't know. You know, you can't see the forest for the trees, as they say. You get so used to how you're doing something and you're familiar with the process that you may not know what kinds of things somebody who's not familiar with it knows how to do. So in our particular team, as they've mentioned before, we had those subject matter experts that knew how to put this together and how to create this project or this document for this project. And then we had the luxury of a business process modeler, a business architect, to work with us to capture this information in that kind of a format. So we got the team together, and before we even got started, we did some business process improvement training. That helped a little bit, so it gives them an idea on the operations and program side of life. Really, this is just a step-by-step. You just take whatever the process is you're trying to do and walk through each and every single step from beginning to end of what it is that you're trying to do, and it's not quite as intimidating as looking at it in that kind of a format. So we modeled the process. There were 5 different pieces that we put together to model this process, to create and submit and approve and track, and then capture the financial pieces of once the expenditures get started on this project. So we did all 5 of those and modeled them looking like that. Each one of those 5 processes look like that. And out of that, there were some rewards that we got that we weren't even thinking about, and I think that's probably a common thing that happens. You find either processes that are too complicated or the things that are missed in a process, or you find out other kinds of improvements that maybe need a little deeper dive. We found that a lot. So what ended up happening, we did an end-to-end process for what we were initially trying to get to, but then we also had a report of all of our findings, recommendations that we found, and then disseminated that out among our other divisions so they could see how that works. We knew that with some of the new rules and the Affordable Care Act, et cetera, there are more opportunities to obtain enhanced federal funding. We didn't want to leave any money on the table, as they say, so we knew that there were going to be more people that may be eligible for this funding that have no idea what this process is or how to do it. So we wanted to be ahead of the curve, so to speak, and have this put together so that when they were eligible to create a project and get that funding, we would have a foundation for them to pull from. So the rewards from that, we have a documented process. And I think it's not just the state, I think it's other organizations. How many of us as managers, we really rely on, I know that John really knows this stuff really well, so I'm not gonna worry about documenting it right now. When you take the time to do this business process modeling, you've now got a documented process that anybody can see anywhere. It's in a repository, it's saved. So when that person retires, the knowledge does not walk out with them. That is invaluable in what we do. We see lots of things. We found that when we were modeling the process, that that we found some errors in how people were coding some of the financial things that we were having a hard time tracking because somebody had retired, somebody picked up the paperwork that they had done. Well, that was an old code that you don't use anymore. You know, just things like that. It's really important to model that process. We created templates to make it easier for somebody to come along. The document itself has instructions within the template to tell you what to put in each of those sections and how to fill it in, and then an example of one that's been approved, and so you can see how that gets applied. That's helped tremendously. Tools, you can use Visio, as I've mentioned. You can use PowerPoint or a more formal tool like IBM Rational System Architect or Sparks Enterprise Architect, which are actual modeling tools. So there's a lot of ways that you can do that to capture that information. And lastly, we created some training courses on the business process improvement so that people coming along, if you know you're going to have to do some business process modeling and you've got a project that's coming up, you can go through that training class, which we did in conjunction with our Workforce Planning and Development Department. So it's an on-demand class that you can take and find out how to do this before you even get there.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to hand this back over to Ken, and he's going to talk a little bit how we estimate these processes and what it's going to take.
But before I do that, I want to give you a very practical scenario where this came into play for us. We had a client that Gary and I both worked with at one time, and they had scoped, before we even arrived, had scoped a project and had started to define some preliminary requirements. And when we sat down and talked with them, one of the things that they asked us is they said, you know what, here's what we want you guys to do. We want you to help shore up these requirements. The other thing we want you to do is let us know if there's any gaps. Let us know if we're missing anything. Well, it would be impossible for us to do that if we didn't develop this functional hierarchy diagram. Because what this does for a given project is it shows all the things and functions that your organization undertakes, and it highlights the things that are in scope or out of scope. So the way that we proved to that individual that there weren't any gaps in our requirements is we took the requirements that we developed and we mapped them to this. And we made sure that we had requirements for all the areas in here that were green. Another practical situation that happened is while we were talking to stakeholders, there were times when the stakeholders who we were interviewing, the individuals with the expertise and who were doing the work every day, would come in and we would start talking to them about their requirements, and they made assumptions about what the scope of this effort was, what was the scope that was in and out of the system. And in addition, they also made some assumptions about what old legacy systems were going to be replaced by the new system. And as we started having discussions with them and talking about requirements, they would say, well, I know that the new system is going to replace ABC system. And we'd look at each other and go, no, it's not. And they'd say, oh, yes, it is. And we showed them this functional hierarchy diagram. And clearly, you could associate the functions with the systems that support it. And we said, this is the scope of the system, and it's not in scope. And ironically, that triggered them to go back and reevaluate the scope of the project because they felt as though they might have missed something or left something out. So that's a very practical use of a document like this and an example of how it keeps everybody on the same page and how you can update it when the scope of your effort or your system changes. So let's go back and talk about this. I'm the PM guy. A lot of times when we start doing this, the first thing that happens is that my client's boss or my client's boss's boss or my client's boss's boss's boss rolls into my cube and says, hey, okay, we're going to do this functional hierarchy diagram. Tell me how long it's going to take, and tell me how many of my people you're going to suck up while we do it. You know, very practical consideration, very practical question that a PM always gets. And then I would look at him and say, well, I can do that. And he goes, and tell me by 5 o'clock. And I'm like, well, do you know it's 4:45? Yeah, I know that. Okay, well, here's the deal. Just through experience and by doing these models, we've been able to come up with some estimates about how long it takes to do a model. And then after you've figured out whether you have models that are of high, medium, or low complexity, you can use these ballpark estimates to determine how long it's going to do a single model. And then on top of that, what you do is you do the math. Because once you figure out how many models you have in these individual categories, then you'll be able to know overall the level of effort it's going to take to get it done. So we've put some estimates there. So if you are, for a business analyst, And the business analyst is the person that's doing the work, right? So that's the person who's going to meet with the SMEs, who's going to document the results of those discussions, who's going to give those models back to the SMEs, who are going to validate them, make some final tweaks, and say, yes, it's okay. For a very high, complex model, about 18 hours of the business analyst time. For the subject matter experts, about 14 hours. Now, the long tent, I always say that, the long tent in the pole. It's the long pole in the tent, right? The long pole in the tent is the business analyst time, because the total amount of time it's going to take in terms of hours to do the work is 18. Because the 14 hours with the SMEs, the 18 hours is inclusive of the SMEs time. And in addition, I might say that if you have 2 or 3 SMEs for a given subject area or a given process flow, then the level of effort is going to be 14 times 3, because you're going to have to engage 3 individuals for 14 hours to get that done. But again, it's going to be simultaneous, because you'll be working with them all at the same time pretty much, so we're not going to extend the amount of time it's going to get done. So that's strictly talking about level of effort. So you can use these estimates to define what it's going to take to get the work done in terms of hours. It's a little bit trickier, though, when you want to schedule the work, because it's less of a mathematical endeavor to figure out the schedule, because there's other considerations that come into play, like how many business analysts you have working on this. Are you going to have parallel tracks or a single track? What is the availability of your SMEs? That part of it is art, and that's where your general project management experience comes in. But the hard science is using these estimates and just doing the math based on the number of hours and the number of models you have to do, and whether they're high, medium, or of low complexity. So, given that, I think that pretty much lays out what we wanted to express to you today in terms of what the model is, how to do it, and what the benefits are. So I'm going to turn it back over to John to wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Ken. So I just want to sort of go over a summary of the benefits of business process modeling. Right? Pretty much, it gets everybody on the same page, providing context for the project. And as you build projects that have a ton of staff that come onto it. What I found as far as running big teams that do application development and technical side of things, it really, really helps if you get everybody up to speed with what the business is doing. Coders want to come in and code. They don't want to know about the business. No, you've got to make them understand the business. So everybody on the project should have that level of understanding. It provides the foundation for the requirements definition. So the detailed requirements all need to map back to the business process model. It really gives a lot of visibility, as Debbie was saying, as to areas where you need to make improvements in the process. I mean, they really kind of jump out to you when you start laying out this process and it's going over here and over there. It's like, wow, that's really convoluted. We really could make some improvements. It makes you think about how are you going to transition your organization, right? Because one of the question I asked there earlier is about some organizations are set up in that they are organized around the functions they perform. So that makes things kind of cleaner quite often. Other organizations are not set up that way. They're set up with organizational units where functions overlap and you're passing a lot of things around between different departments. And at time, then implementing new systems gives you an opportunity to reorganize and realign with how you're going to use technology, perhaps streamline the functionality if you've got users now coming in and doing self-service online. Perhaps functions are going away that you previously had. So you can take advantage of to some degree, take advantage of the chaos of a new system being implemented to reorganize and get streamlined. Greatly improves the chance of your project realizing the goal, right, of successful implementation. So then, for outcomes, what we've hit on here pretty hard is the alignment with the new SIM project approval lifecycle. So going through this modeling, you can start to understand how much budget you're going to need, what kinds of project resources you're going to need, so you really start to shape the project up. You can get the different stakeholders that you need involved. So if you've got multiple organizations that are going to be involved with this project, maybe it's a system that integrates things for a couple of different departments, you can get those guys on the same page, right? Well, obviously, I don't know how many of you have worked with the oversight agencies when you used to send FSRs over, or you now send these documents over. You got to get those guys on the same page as you so they will approve them, right? And step through, get you through that process so you can get on with the project itself, right? So yeah, I mean, the key there from what I've seen is people complain about, okay, it takes a long time to get project approval. Well, if you've got all this material ready to go and you can show them that you've done your homework here, you'll get that approval much more quickly. So that kind of wraps up what I had to say. So if we've got questions, we've got some very bright people here who are able to answer them. And then the other thing before we jump into questions is please use your PSP app to rate this class. So you can go on there and fill out the summary itself. Okay.
Do you have a trial version before we buy kind of thing like your software?
I'm sorry?
A trial version of your software before we decide to buy?
Oh, the modeling software? Yeah, the modeling software is something like Visio, or it's not something we're selling, right? And there may well be other. I think there may be some other software out there as well. So, and the BPM modeling is it's an industry standard.
Right,
So,
I use it, but I thought
oh, okay. No.
There's one over there, John.
Go ahead.
This question is for Deborah and Chris, specifically with the state. So there's a lot of talk about business process modeling in my shop as well. The question we always have is these resources now exist on the IT side of the shop. Is there any effort, or is there any discussion, or are there any models we could talk about to actually operationalize business process modeling so that it's not a part of a change or a project?
We're looking at each other.
I know we're looking at each other like, well, the way that we've handled it now, our future goal at some point, today we are on the project side and have a consulting team that knows how to do business process modeling, and they are embedded within our projects, and that's how we've done this so far. This is a brand new effort, so what we're hoping to do is create some training classes on business process modeling and to, at some point, do some knowledge transfer so that the state folks on the program sides will learn how to do the modeling, sort of a train the trainer kind of thing. That's the ultimate goal that we want to get to, where we'll have state folks that actually know how to use those tools and model processes.
Now, a similar answer is, from my experience, usually it starts in the projects, but what I've seen a lot of organizations do is it moves to their enterprise architecture shop if they have one, and they actually become the catalysts and the trainers, and then they do the training out to the program. Because I agree with Deborah, ultimately you want to get it to the programs can do this. It becomes part of their normal business, so it's kind of a continuous improvement approach. So whenever they have new or changes to their business, they go through this process to see what changes to happen, document it there, and they can just do their process improvement from the get-go.
We just actually went through that exercise, and it was kind of like we were going in there to do the mid-level requirements, but the problem was we were going there fresh just to organize some requirements, and we said we really need to get context, otherwise you're not going to get the right level of detail in these requirements. But when we did the effort to do the FHD with the client we just did it with, it didn't really take any more than a couple of weeks to get a shell out there. It depends on what level of scrutiny you want to go to with it and the level of approval. We kind of advocate you want to be accurate, right? But you don't want to go to a point where you're going to be going through all this approval life cycle and it's never going to get done, right? But you're always going to have subjectivity to what people call functions. The key is really going through the process to define it. And we did that in a couple of weeks.
And I should say that it started out a little bit difficult to get the organization to allow the time and to provide us with the resources to do it. But they kept asking us one key question: are there any gaps? Are there any gaps? And my answer was consistently, I don't know unless I do this. Are you missing anything? I don't know unless I do this. And so after a while, and then I even turned it around, I said, well, you tell me based on all this if there are gaps. And they said, I don't know. So then we ended up doing a functional hire. But seriously, it was that easy of a sell after we talked through the benefits of doing this, if that makes sense.
As a vendor, sometimes you have the advantage that people tend to believe you. You know, so we pushed back. We probably said the same thing that people were saying internally, right? And you know, in our experience, you've got to do it. So. Be happy to. Can I bring some beer?
Drop your card in the
Yeah.
beer basket back there. And
Be happy to. Any more questions?
There was another question, yeah.
Yeah, so in the example that you just showed there, you had 18 hours for business analysts for a high complex model, right? So how many hours does this number, like if the business analyst like is very experienced or if they're like less experienced, do you average it out or is there solution to get that level of detail into this mechanism?
To do it in that number of hours, I think it's somebody who's fairly experienced at this.
Right.
It's not a rookie. So, I mean, if you had more junior staff, you'd probably want to multiply it by a certain factor, you know, to allow for that. So, yeah.
Sir.
Question back there, too.
Was there another question back there? Yeah.
Then we'll get to you.
I'm sorry? Are they posted online? Was that not?
I think the poster he's talking about, it's from a Dutch or a German site, but it's in English and it's actually quite comprehensive. I have it open.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
there's a number. The object
Okay.
modeling group, if you go to the object management group, sorry, if you go to their website, they're going to have a whole manual, and it's enormous.
Okay.
As far as there is numerous sites that you can go.
Yeah,
I mean, hundreds.
Actually, yeah, you can print out something that's about this thick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really more than you need, but,
We've
Yeah.
given you all you need right there.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, one page, and that's all you
Okay,
need, really.
well, thank you,
Wait,
everyone.
oh, hey, John, we had one
One
other
more,
question,
one
sir. Go for it.
Just based on that estimating, have you guys used the PERT analysis, the program evaluation, review technique?
No.
Evaluating
This is based on real life experience for us. And after we would come up with these with these time estimates, we did what any good PM would do, is you would go back and say, well, were we high or were we low or did we miss? It's really based on real life experience versus some of the mathematical computations that you can use, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.